Well, good morning, YouTube. All right, guys, in today's video, we are going to go over the 500-mile review. As you guys know, I bought a 2024 Road Glide while we were out in the Sturgis rally, and I got a chance to put over 500 miles on it. 587 miles to be exact at this point. And there are some things that I like about this, and some things that I didn't care for about this, and some things I've learned along the way. So I thought I'd share it all with you. So let's talk about it. All right, before we get too far into it, while we were in Sturgis, we kind of did this thing where I was asking you guys what you thought the name of the project should be. And overwhelmingly, Dr. Evil won it out. So that is officially what we're naming this project, is Dr. Evil. And we are going to create a playlist for that project so that every step we take on this motorcycle, that will all be in a playlist. We got a lot of stuff to come. But let's get into my thoughts after 500 miles on my very first brand new Harley Davidson. Now, we're not exactly making a list of pros and cons in that order. So I'm not going to list out all the pros. I'm not going to list out all the cons. We're just going to have a conversation and we're going to talk about the individual things that I found that I liked and I disliked along the way. First off, guys, some of the things I found in the specifications for this motorcycle were a little bit surprising. One of the things that I found to be quite interesting is that although this motorcycle technically is a little bit smaller than the Street Glide, the Road Glide actually weighs a little bit more. Coming in at 838 pounds in the Road Glide model and 811 for the Street Glide model. And yeah, I said it was a little bit smaller than the Street Glide, and the overall length is exactly the same. The differences really come with this front fairing. So the overall width of this Road Glide is 37.2 inches wide, where the Street Glide comes in at 38.4 inches wide. So that's in 1.2 inches wider on the fairing. The bags, everything in the rear is exactly the same. The fairing is really the only difference between these two motorcycles. Whereas the overall height on this fairing is 51.8 inches, and on the Street Glide, it is 53.1 inches. Making the Street Glide a little more than an inch and a half taller than the Road Glide. The other thing I found a little interesting is that the overall road clearance, the Road Glide has 0.2 of an inch more at 5.7 inches, where the Street Glide comes in at 5.5 inches. Now, what I find ironic about that is that although the Road Glide sits taller off the ground, technically, it actually has a lower seat height. So the seat height on the standard Road Glide is 25.9 inches, where the Street Glide comes in at 26.1 inches. So there's 0.2 more inches in ground clearance, but then there's still 0.2 lower seat height. Seems a little counterintuitive to me, but they must have just cut the seat down a little bit more. All right, guys, as you know, this bike comes with the 117 cubic inch Milwaukee 8 V-twin V45 engine, produced by Harley Davidson. They began the Milwaukee 8 engine design in 2017 in the touring models and 2018 in the Softail line. But this is the first year that the 117 has been the standard in the base model. In past years, it was the upgraded motor. And 117 cubic inches comes out to 1,923 cubic centimeters. All right, and it has a 4.075 inch bore with a 4.5 inch stroke. And I will say that that leads to some very good performance actually riding the motorcycle. Now, when I first picked this up from the dealership, all I had to do was drive it back over to our vending site, just one parking lot over. And immediately I noticed how touchy the throttle was and how stiff the clutch was. In fact, I don't know that this clutch is actually adjusted properly. It seems like there's absolutely no play in the lever whatsoever, and it seems really, really firm to pull. Now, might just be because of the higher horsepower engine, they've got a stiffer spring in the clutch. That could lead to the stiffer pull, but it just feels a little bit different to me. The other thing that I noticed immediately was how it felt like it had a much lower center of gravity. The bike felt lighter than it is. I mean, at 838 pounds, it is not a light machine by any means, and I don't know how that stacks up compared to the Street King, because I've never actually put that on a scale, and it's not stock, so the stock weights aren't going to be accurate. However, this just feels lighter and more nimble instantly. I mean, the second you get on it, and that's just riding it through a parking lot, not even having the ability to get on the street with it just yet. As I was saying with the clutch, it just feels like there's absolutely no play in it whatsoever. Maybe just a tiny bit. I think there should be a little bit more free play in it. So it disengages almost immediately when pulling the lever, and I don't feel like I've got that good friction zone there. This may just be an adjustment, and I may fix that here in the very near future. If not, I will definitely make adjustments when I do the 1,000-mile service. And because of that feel, I've noticed that it's a little bit challenging to get smooth shifts. It's very different from the other motorcycle. I feel like if I'm actually actuating the clutch lever all the way, then I'm kind of letting out too slow and getting that kind of catch to it. And if I try to do it fast or I'm just doing it, I still get kind of the jerk. I'm not real smooth with it yet, but a lot of that may just come with practice. Another thing I noticed is that when I am downshifting, when I pull the clutch lever in and I actuate the shift linkage, I can almost feel the downshift in the lever. Like I feel a clunk in the lever, which I've never had on any other motorcycle before. And again, maybe that will change with the adjustments. It's only on the downshift. I don't feel it on the upshift, but on the downshift, especially when I'm revving the throttle to rev match as I make the shift, I do get that little clunk in the lever. Kind of annoying, but it's not that terrible. As I mentioned, the throttle was super touchy. So the first night that I got the motorcycle, when we closed up for the day, we went out to dinner. And we didn't go far. We just got on the interstate, ran up 2 exits and got off. And I think we went to Texas Roadhouse or Olive Garden or something. I don't remember exactly. And although the thing accelerated really, really good, it just seemed that the throttle was so sensitive that every little bump in the road or even just adjustment of my wrist, I was on and off the throttle. I wasn't very smooth with it. A couple of days later, playing with the modes, I actually switched the motorcycle over to the rain mode, and that actually made it much better. That smoothed out that throttle response and made it a little bit smoother to drive. And I might add that even in rain mode, it had a better performance value than the old bike did. It still, even though it cut the power a lot, it was still faster accelerating and just a more linear power curve, even in rain mode. So I decided that I was just gonna leave it in rain mode as I got used to it, and I went through the engine break-in process. Now, Harley Davidson wants you to do the engine break-in process in a very specific manner for the first 500 miles, and I tried to stick to that the best I could. So there was no need for full performance, really, in that first 500 miles. So I decided to leave it in rain mode. It made it a little bit easier to drive and less sensitive. Now, while we were in Sturgis, we only got about 170 miles on it there. And then when we went to Ron and Brenda's house afterwards, we did that day, we put a little over 200 miles on it. And last week here at home, we finally hit that 500 mile mark where I'm past that break-in period. If you guys saw the video where we took Alan up to Bell Mountain for that beautiful view, one thing I noticed there coming down that hill is that it didn't seem like it had as much engine braking. Typically, like on my Harley, I would just leave first gear, let the clutch out, and it would just kind of crawl down that mountain at like 10 or 15 mile an hour, which is a good safe speed for how steep and sharp those curves are. But on this, it kept wanting to go faster. I didn't get the engine braking I thought it should. And that was gonna be one of my complaints. But then I figured out why. It's because I still had it in rain mode. And as I read my owner's manual and understood the different modes a little bit better, the program tells it to have less engine braking when it's in rain mode. So basically what it's doing is it's not chopping the throttle as fast. It's actually spitting just a little bit more fuel in there to keep that engine running a little bit more than a true closed throttle decel. Now, since then, I've taken it out of rain mode and put it back into sport mode, and there is definitely better braking ability. And the more I drive it, the more I'm getting used to that really sensitive throttle. But at this point, I've only got about 85 miles on it, if that, in sport mode. So I'm still getting used to that, but it's getting better for sure. And I honestly think that having it out of rain mode has actually made my shifts a little bit smoother. I think that little bit of extra throttle that the machine was giving it, not me, was kind of messing me up a little bit there. So again, just still getting used to it. Now, some of the things that I'm saying that I like or dislike on this video are obviously my own opinions. And they're based on what I am coming from and what I'm going to. So as you guys know, the Street King is a 2004. There are 20 years of differences between the two motorcycles. Some of the things I really like of this bike is the chassis and suspension seems so much better than my bike. Now, Harley actually changed the chassis in 2009. So those of you that have '09 and newer models may have already known what I've finally experienced. And it's not that I haven't ridden motorcycles that are newer. I just haven't had time to really ride them. It's all been doing test rides or diagnostic rides, not going out and joyriding. I don't get a chance to joyride my customers' motorcycles very often. With that said, in 2009, I think is when they lengthened the chassis, made things different. And I think that contributed to the bike riding better and handling a little bit better. Also, this bike has got a fairly tall suspension. So I believe it's a 13-inch shock on this, where the Road King has only got like an 11-inch shock. So my cornering ability is much better on this motorcycle. Topped with that lower center of gravity and that lighter feel, this thing handles way, way better than the Street King does. So I'm really, really happy with that. You know, the brakes on this thing are absolutely awesome. I mean, you just 2 fingers and just gently kind of hit that lever and it will bring this bike to a stop no matter what speed you were going. And it does build speed pretty fast, especially in sport mode. This engine is very, very powerful compared to my old 88 twin cam. Even though that had cams and like a stage 2 in it, this is a big difference over that. Like I said, I don't believe there are any real significant chassis changes after 2009, maybe some minor things, but it definitely led to a more comfortable, better handling motorcycle. My lean angles are a lot better. I have scraped the kickstand a couple of times going through left-hand corners, but I've yet to scrape on the right-hand side yet at all. Now, another thing contributing to that better handling is different wheel and tire packages. Now, I am not a huge fan of the style of these wheels. Kind of don't like them at all, to be honest. Some people love them, just not my thing. You know, but the Street King came with 16-inch front, 16-inch rear, and the rear was thin. It was the MU85 wheel and tire package on that, and it was fine for its day, I guess. But this has the 180 on the back, the 130/19 on the front. I believe it's an 18-inch wheel on the rear, and it really, really makes the bike handle better. Now, when I went to the 21 on my bike, it definitely handled better than the 16 with the big fat tire on it. So wheel and tire package does make a difference in handling for sure. All right, so let's talk body and design. All in all, I love the new look with the exception of the headlight and the front fairing. You know, they redesigned the shape of the bags on the new bike. They redesigned the shape of the side covers. They redesigned the shape of the tank. And they even kind of designed the front fender differently. It's very similar to the ST models that were in the previous years. The bags are not the extended bags, but because of the new shape, they've actually got a much larger capacity to them. In fact, one of the days we were out in Rapid City, I had to run and get some of the oil dry, like basically kitty litter that soaks up oil. And so I just jumped on the bike and I ran out to get it. Well, it's a 20-pound bag, I believe. And I had my jacket in one saddlebag, my hoodie and a couple other things in another saddlebag. My drone was in there. So I combined everything into one saddlebag and I fit that entire bag of kitty litter into this left saddlebag. Now I had to play with the kitty litter and shape it to get the fit, but it fit and the lid was able to close on top securely and I was able to get it back without it hanging over or sitting on my lap or anything. I thought that was pretty amazing. On the side covers, another note, a lot of people have mentioned the little black piece down here and sometimes they don't like that. I don't mind it. But that's actually just a scuff card. It's there in case your boot scuffs the side cover, or actually your passenger's boot most likely, but it just pops off. And believe it or not, it's already painted to match the body color underneath. So if you don't like the black on the bottom of the side cover, just pop it off and it's already paint matched underneath. I kind of like the two-tone there, but I think what I'm gonna do is have this paint matched in a gloss black to match the engine, the dash, and what will eventually be the trim on the dash panel once Paul takes care of me, hopefully in Ocean City. All right, the fuel tank got a new design as well. You get this little flat angled edge here, and I kind of like the shape of it. I think it looks good. It's a little bit different than traditional Harley, but it's not really that far off from what you'd expect from a Harley. It's still 6 gallons, so it's still got a good capacity, but I really like the styling on it. All right, then my least favorite part, the headlight. I'm just not a fan of the way the headlight looked. And guys, a little history on that. Because I grew up with the road race bikes in the mid-late 80s and into the 90s, all of the really cool bikes like the GSX-Rs and the CBR 900RR, the ZX7, the FZRs, they all had this dual round headlight look to them. And I always loved that. And maybe it's just because what I'm used to, that I always liked the Road Glide because it had the twin headlights. Even in the later models, it was one headlight assembly, but it still looked like 2 headlights side by side. Well, in this, they totally changed it. So now there's still a low beam and a high beam, obviously, but the low beam is up above, the high beam is down below, and it's more of a bar type system, which I get it. That's kind of the new trend. It just doesn't have that traditional Road Glide look that I was kind of hoping for. And that is something that I plan on changing to a dual headlight system. Now, here's what I really, really don't like about this headlight, and I haven't heard anybody else talk about it yet. And I didn't realize it until I was reading the service manual. This headlight is 100% non-serviceable. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you have a bulb go out, you can't replace the bulb. If the low beam fails, you have to replace the entire headlight assembly. If the high beam fails, you have to replace the entire headlight assembly. If one of your turn signals doesn't work, you have to replace the entire headlight assembly. It is non-serviceable. And if you guys look here, I looked it up through Ronnie's Harley Davidson, and you're looking at over $1,500 to replace that headlight assembly. And I think that's ridiculous. I'm hoping that with whatever I go to change it with, will be a little bit more serviceable. And if I need to replace one or the other, it'll be cheaper and easier to do. But who knows? I haven't 100% decided exactly which route I'm going to go with it. But it's not going to be this for long, I promise that. Now, with that said, this is all LED technology lighting, and it shouldn't go bad anytime soon. It shouldn't burn out like an incandescent bulb would and have to be replaced as often. And I guess that's the theory behind it. It's just the idea that if something does go wrong and one of the 4 setups in here no longer works, you have to replace the whole thing. That I don't care for. All right, while we're up front here, let's talk about this windshield. This is the Clockworks windshield, and I believe this is a 13.5 or a 14-inch windshield. I don't recall. But the factory windshield on here was god awful. It was slapped on there probably to look cool, and it did. It looked clean, it looked sleek. But the first time I got it up on the interstate, it blasted me with so much wind right in my chest and my face. It was actually awful to ride. I said that it felt like it was taking air from Interstate 94 up in North Dakota and forcing it down to me on Interstate 90 in South Dakota. It was that much air in my face. It was awful. Now, the next day, Paul had let me try out a touring model windshield that was an OEM Harley one, but for like an Ultra Road Glide or something. Much taller, clear, and it was way better as far as the wind buffeting goes and not being hammered by the wind. It looked awful on here. It just had that kind of old man geezer glide look. And I get it. Some people are into that. I didn't really want that look. But what I didn't like about that is there was a whistle to it. Like I could actually hear like a screech almost at highway speeds, and didn't care for it all. That was on there for a couple of days. And then Paul came over and said, here, try this one. It's got a small flaw in it. There's a little crack right there that you can barely see. But it let me use it temporarily until the one I want comes in. It was the one I want is a little bit shorter than this, same style, but just a little bit shorter. And it's just on back order. So when it gets here, we will swap it out for that, and I'll give Paul this one back. Now, this windshield works awesome, and I'm not sponsored by Brian Clock or anything, but this windshield works great. It gets the air up and over me. When I kind of feel with my hand, I got to get a little bit above my head before I feel it hitting me. It's quiet. It feels great. My only complaint with this one is, like I said, it's slightly too tall. And during the day, it's not an issue. I can see over it without a problem. But at night, I noticed that the cutoff point in my headlight is just about where the top of the windshield is from my perspective. And I'd like my windshield to be just a little bit shorter so I don't feel like I'm looking over it at night. I don't feel like I'm looking over it during the day, only at night. But styling wise, I think it's a little bit too tall for the look that I want. But I'm not all about looks necessarily. I'd rather have the function. So I'm gonna try the one that's shorter. I think we're gonna try the 10 inch or the 10.5 inch. And if that still gets the air over me and keeps me happy and it looks better, then that's the route we're gonna go with. Now you guys know I already replaced the tail lights on this and put these Custom Dynamics ones in here, and actually had Paul over the fairing exchange. His crew did that for me because I didn't like the look of the tail lights. Now I'll be honest, I didn't like the way they looked on this bike. I've seen some of the completely black bikes and they tend to blend in a little better and don't look terrible. And I didn't hate them. I just didn't care for them. In my opinion, they look like the taillights off of an F-350 or something. They look like car taillights that were just kind of shoved onto a motorcycle as an afterthought. I said many times it looked like they built the whole motorcycle. Oh crap, we forgot to put taillights on it. So they just came up with something at the last minute and shoved them in there. I guess it's a matter of opinion. Some people love the new taillights, some people don't. I was one of the ones that didn't. So I really like the Custom Dynamic look on here. It just cleans it up, smooths it out, and kind of sets them in. I just always liked that look. I really like the way that the new Glovebox works on both sides. Older models, they had to either flip up this way or you had to grab them from here and flip them back. On these, you just one touch it and they pop open, one touch it and they close again. Now, the one thing that I don't care for is the one on the right side of the motorcycle. It is designed with the USB-C port inside so that you can plug in your phone or mobile device and it can pair with your electric system. But Harley's thought on this was you're gonna plug your phone in, slide it in the pocket, close the glove box down, and your phone would stay in there. I like my phone up on the handlebar where I can see what's going on, even if it is Apple CarPlay to the audio unit. I just like it being where I can see it and visible, and also because I record with it on a regular basis. So that didn't work for me. So in order to have it plugged in and charge and link to the system, I've got this cord coming out, going to the handlebar, kind of wrapping its way up to the phone mount. I'm not a big fan of that. It's working just fine. It's just not the way I prefer to do it. I would love it if there was a way that that was routed differently, or even had something up here to plug it into and not went to the fairing, maybe went down into the main harness. And like I said, because we're gonna do a more of a performance bagger build with this, I think the shorter bags and the smaller fender, they're gonna really fit the theme of that just nicely. All right, let's talk about the snowplow for a minute. Yeah, we nicknamed it the snowplow because that's pretty much what it looks like down here. I'm not real fond with the way it looks. However, I think it's better than having to have lowers on there on a bike that has the liquid cooled heads. And yes, this bike has the liquid cooled heads, what they call the dual cool. It's not a true liquid cooled system. It's an air cooled engine with basically water assisted heads, if you will. So down here, they've placed the radiator, the water pump, and the regulator rectifier for the charging system kind of sits up in there as well. I think they kept it as clean as they could for what they were trying to do. Now, again, for the performance bagger build, what I want to go for, I didn't want lower fairings. So I like the fact that I didn't have to have lower fairings to get the cooling system. Now, given a choice, I probably would not have bought a bike with the cooling system. But for 2024, you don't have a choice anymore. This is the standard base model Road Glide. And same thing with the Street Glide. They come with it whether you want it or not. Where in the earlier years, you had to get either a limited or a CVO model, or basically you had to purchase the package to get it with an upgraded package. And now it's just standard. So I don't hate it, but I don't like it either. It's a little bit large, but I get it. It does its job. And I don't know, we'll learn to live with it, right? All right, and you know that we already changed the tag bracket and tag light assembly on here. We referred to the old one as a diving board. It literally stuck off of the motorcycle probably 5 inches. I'm just guesstimating. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Well, if I was exaggerating, I said it was a foot and a half. But it just looked terrible. It looked like a tail light, tag light assembly for like a semi-truck trailer or some type of piece of heavy equipment. It didn't look like it belonged on a motorcycle. So again, Paul over at the Fairing Exchange hooked me up with this custom dynamics unit that looks really, really nice and cleans up the look, and it just so much better. Okay, so you know I cleaned up the shifter already. That was in another video. I put the shift linkage on from Baker Customs. He calls it the Fat Rod Kit. I got the one that was gloss black because it matched the rest of the motorcycle. There's zero performance value in what we did there. It just looks better, and it should be longer lasting because it uses a true Heim joint rather than like the ball and socket that the factory one used. But it looks better. In addition, I took off the heel shift. To me, that was a comfort thing. I know some people love heel shifts. I can't stand them. I've got really large feet, and with that heel shift on there, I could not move my foot. It had to be in one position and one position only, and I didn't like that. So with it off, it gives me the freedom to move my foot around. Like I said, coming from the road racing industry on sport bikes and everything, I'm not used to having a heel shifter anyways. I never use it. It was just encumbering, and it's so much more comfortable for me not having it, because I can back my feet up on these floorboards considerably. I don't ride with my feet forward that much. Again, sport bike, I tend to ride back like as if I had a mid control. And someday I probably will put mid controls on this, but I kind of hang my heels off of the back of these floorboards. And with that heel shifter there, it just wasn't possible. Now I also, because I removed that heel shifter, I added the little cleanup grommet there. It's a cap that Baker also supplied. And it just looks nice and cleans it up so you don't have that raw metal shaft sticking out of the end of it. All right, I mentioned earlier the brakes on this unit are awesome. This bike has no trouble stopping. I don't care how fast you're going. If you grab a handful of brake and a footful of brake, it's going to stop. And with the advanced ABS system on here, you don't really have to worry about, you know, debris on the road or wet roads, depending on what mode you have it in. The different riding modes will change the level of ABS input as well as the level of traction control input. So that's all kind of tunable, and I really haven't played with that a lot. But the one thing I did notice with the ABS is the initial bite. When you first grab the lever and pull in on it, you get kind of a shudder, like a vibration, and it was a little bit annoying at first. And that's just part of having ABS. My old bike didn't have ABS. It's just something I've got to get used to. It's a good feature to have if you need it, but it takes a little bit of adjusting to get used to it. Now, I might also add that since I have taken it out of rain mode and put it into sport mode, that shudder doesn't seem to be as apparent, because in sport mode, it pulls back some of your ABS. It allows you to have a little bit more control before activating that ABS system. Again, the brakes work great. It's just a minor little caveat that drives me crazy a little bit, but I'm getting used to it. This also has a linked brake function. So under certain circumstances, I guess, applying rear brake and front brake simultaneously is still the best way to do it. But if you apply just front or just rear, there is a certain level of sharing. I did read through it in the owner's manual, but I wasn't able to memorize exactly how it worked, but it's a pretty cool system. Not sure if I like it, because I like to be able to keep my brakes independent for doing different maneuvers, but so far it hasn't inhibited me any at all that I can tell. All right, so the exhaust is 100% completely stock on here, and it's quiet. I mean, you can hear a little bit of an engine tone, but I noticed that when I was riding and Talon was behind me or Alan was behind me, I could actually hear their bikes over mine. Because it is so quiet, I noticed that sometimes you don't feel like you're going as fast as you're going. Quiet doesn't equal fast, logistically. Basically, when I roll into the throttle, I'll shift through the gears. I don't feel like I'm going real fast because I don't hear the engine working. I don't hear the sound of the exhaust roaring behind me. But then I look down and I'm in third gear hitting 80 mile an hour. And so it just, you don't hear the speed as much. And I know you all know exactly what I mean by that. But there is something to be said about riding a stock bike. I haven't ridden a bike or a car or a truck or anything with stock exhaust in a long, long time. And there's a part of me that's actually really enjoying how quiet this motorcycle is. I can actually hear the engine running rather than the exhaust. I can hear the radio, I can hear the road noise, I can hear the brake rotors when I apply brake. I almost feel a little bit more in tune with the motorcycle, and it's relaxing to drive it right now. But I know that at some point that's going to change. We're going to do a 2-in-1 performance exhaust system on here, and it's going to be a little bit noisier. I'm going to try and get something that isn't obnoxiously loud, but I definitely want that deep, mellow tone. All right, getting into the electronics. This is the part that kind of scared me. This is one of the reasons part of me didn't want this motorcycle, is because I don't fully understand this whole dash unit. Like information center, basically. I forget what they call it. It's got a lot of really cool features and a couple of things that I'm not so crazy about. One, I do like the fact that it's got the different ride modes, and you can just push a button and switch between like road mode, rain mode, and sport mode. And then on top of that, you can go in and do custom modes. So I can put it in a road mode, but I can program road mode to my particular liking, which I may do, because I still think that the throttle is a little bit too abrupt on it. And I think it's great for sport mode, but I think for just cruising around, I might change how sensitive that throttle input is, at least up to 10%. But that way, when I want to hammer the throttle hard, I'm past that 10% anyways, and it's not going to work. But that's that gentle rolling in and rolling out, or just hitting slight bumps, or even just readjusting my hand on the grip or something like that. I'm not so jerky with the throttle. And again, the more I ride it, the better I'm getting at that anyways. So the display unit on this is really nice, and there is some configurability. You've got what they call touring mode, and you can have like the speedometer on the left, the tachometer on the right. You've got the menu section in the middle. And you can play with that. You can turn it into a sport mode where everything's kind of combined into the one gauge, but you don't get as much information, but you still have road speed, you have engine speed, so on and so forth. And then there's a third configuration where it puts everything right in the center. I wish there was a way to custom tailor that a little bit more. I'd like to have different information on there. So I can scroll through the menu and I can find like my tire pressures and stuff like that. What I can't find in here is like how to reset service intervals. I can't find how to view other PIDs within the engine management system. Like I want to see what my cylinder head temperatures are, what my coolant temperatures are. And I know that the ECM is monitoring all this stuff, but it's not showing the rider. And maybe there's got to be an interface or something I've got to plug in to be able to access that. Or maybe if I use the diagnostic tooling, I can go in there and I can set things. I can see that in the system, I'm able to use that to turn on and off switches. Like if I wanted to add an accessory, I can make a button appear on that screen to turn that accessory on or off. But in the instructions in the owner's manual, it never tells me how to actually apply that. I'm assuming that you have to have a dealer do it, or somebody that has that software that can plug into the motorcycle and make it happen. And most likely I'll just have to invest in that stuff anyways. So the system is ready to accept Apple CarPlay. And I use Apple phones, so when I'm plugged in, the Apple CarPlay comes up. I have had some issues with connectivity with it, where just riding down the road, the Apple CarPlay system will come up and it'll all be there, and then a couple minutes later, it'll all go away. And then it'll come back and it'll go away. And it didn't do that for the first couple of days. It really started doing it the day that we were riding over in Wisconsin, and I'm not sure exactly why it's happening. Now, one of the first modifications we had made to the motorcycle was as I was leaving the dealership with my brand new purchase. I didn't make it out of the parking lot. The guys over at Sounds Customs called me in. They said, hey, let's hook up a Bluetooth CarPlay adapter for you. And they took off the seat, they plugged in a module, and it's supposed to eliminate the need for plugging in the phone to the USB-C port. Now, I've still been plugging the phone in, so maybe I'm being counterintuitive by doing both, and I'm not sure. But I'm plugging the phone in because I want the phone charging. As I'm riding, I tend to be recording, and I don't want to drain my battery, so I keep it plugged in. Now, I do have the quad lock system on there that has a wireless charger built into it, but I haven't finished the wiring on that, so it's not charging the phone. So maybe, just maybe, when I get that wired in, then when I put the phone on the mount, it's automatically going to start charging, and then maybe the Bluetooth will allow the CarPlay to work the way it's supposed to, and then maybe all these problems will go away. But one of the things I don't like is once the CarPlay screen comes up, it takes over like 2/3 of the screen and it moves all of my gauges off to one side. What I would prefer is to keep the 2 gauges because I like the 2-gauge system, and then just have the CarPlay minimized a little bit and then in the center where the menu is, and then I can always go out of CarPlay into menu if I wanted to, but my gauges would still be where I was. So I would like a little bit more versatility in being able to set the gauges up more custom rather than just the 3 presets that they have. Also, you can turn it to a contrast, like a day or night, and in contrast mode, it's a white background with all black gauges. And I did that for a day or two and I just didn't care for it. So I switched it back to the black face with the orange and red gauges. I just think it looks a little bit more appealing rather than the big white screen. Now, what's cool is that when I am hooked up to Apple CarPlay, obviously I can control my phone if I wanted to, but the screen on this is actually a touch screen, so you can control things from the screen. Now, there are some things like the menus you can control either by touching the screen or by using the navigation controls on both handlebars. There are some functions it will not let you do when you're moving, which is probably pretty smart. People don't need to be scrolling through the menus and trying to read things on the screen while they're running down a curvy road. So the bike is pretty smart when it comes to that. If you start moving a certain speed, it will not allow you to do certain functions on that menu. And I'm sure there's a lot of functions in here that I will probably never use, but there's also some functionality that I wish it had that I can't use. So I'm a little tossed on the electronics right now. Now, I know you've heard me mention looking through the manual, and yes, I did read through my owner's manual. It took me forever, multiple days, because this thing is huge. It is 261 pages, mostly useful information, some of it absolutely useless. A lot of redundancies. They could have made this thing a lot smaller and a lot easier of a read if they didn't have like the same warnings over and over and over again. Like probably 15 times throughout the manual, it told me to check my air pressure before every ride. And I get it, liability, they've got to do some of this, but I wish it was a little bit dumbed down, I guess, or maybe less dumbed down. But it's pretty comprehensive. I know a lot of people don't actually read their owner's manuals, but because this is a completely new technology motorcycle, I wanted to kind of understand it the best I could. Now, I didn't 100% read all of the warranty section of it because until I have a warranty issue, I'm not going to retain that information now, and it doesn't really matter. But I did find some very interesting specs in here, things like how the ABS and the traction control and the percentages and all that stuff that works. It was definitely worth the read, even though there was a lot of excess information that I didn't know or that I already knew. All right, guys, so in closing, I love it. I mean, it's the simplest way I can say it is I absolutely love it. Even though there's a few things I didn't like, a few flaws going on, all in all, it's a much better riding motorcycle. It's a much better handling motorcycle. It's got a lot more power. It's more comfortable. It's more advanced, which scares me a little bit, but I'll adapt. As far as, the first 5 or almost 600 miles on it, I love it. I can't wait to put more miles on it, and I can't wait to make it a little bit more customized to me. Eventually, we're going to have to put a new seat on it because, like I said, short trips, it's fine. That 200-mile day, even though it wasn't 200 miles at one time, I started to get a little bit saddle sore, but not bad. I'd imagine if I was really doing a cross-country trip, then I would want a better seat. Handlebars, we're gonna have to change those. You guys know I adjusted them the day after I bought the motorcycle. I cut the pin off and I rotated them forward, and it is much better than the way it was when I got it, but it's still not right. So handlebars and seat are probably gonna be one of the first things I do, and then we're gonna work on suspension. This suspension is great. It smooths out the bumps a whole lot more than I expected them to. There's times I'll be going down a road and I'll be feeling the bumps and I'll be thinking to myself, wow, on the Road King, this would suck right now. And on this, it's very bearable, very tolerable. It's actually a very nice riding bike. Now, with that said, I have not set the suspension up for me yet. This is bone stock, the way it came out of the factory. There is a guide in here that tells me with my weights and my cargo on how to set the suspension up. And I think in another video, we are going to do that so that you guys can see exactly how it's supposed to be done according to Harley Davidson. And at some point, we're probably gonna go with an aftermarket suspension on here. and then we'll see how big of a difference we can make setting that up properly as compared to the factory stuff set up properly. Also, hopefully by the time we get to Ocean City, we'll have hit the 1,000 miles and we'll be doing a 1,000-mile service. I want to do an in-depth 1,000-mile service video on it, going by the book, piece by piece, page by page, showing you guys exactly what you got to do for your service to make sure that you're warranty compliant and that you're taking care of your motorcycle the way it should be taken care of. So there will be a lot more videos to come on Project Dr. Evil, or maybe just call it Dr. Evil. The playlist will probably be called Project Dr. Evil. But yeah, and just so you guys know, I did get my permanent tag for it. I say permanent. It's not going to be the permanent tag. It's the tag they gave me at the tag office when I actually registered it in my name, so I can take off that temp tag that's on it now. In fact, I'll probably do that as soon as we're done with this video. But I actually ordered a custom tag, a personalized tag, I guess you should say, and they approved it. It's going to say Dr. Evil right on the license plate, and I can't wait to get that on there. I just think it'll be pretty cool. Well, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know that I may not have covered every single thing I liked or disliked about this motorcycle. Sometimes when you're sitting here making a video, it's really difficult to remember everything. And I'm sure that there's going to be more likes and dislikes along the way, and I will definitely keep you guys apprised of that. You know, maybe by the time we get to the 1,000-mile service, I'll have had a little bit more road time on it in the different modes. But right now, I'm really, really loving this bike, and I'm excited to have it. I'm excited to do all the things that we're going to do to it in the future. If that interests you, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see the progress on Dr. Evil, the 2024 Road Glide. And until the next time we see you, keep those engines running.